Oh, the 90s. What a great movie decade you were. The Matrix, Independence Day, Scream. We all have our favourites from this transformative and epic decade of cinema, but undoubtedly there's stuff you probably didn't know about them. So join What Culture for a bumper list headed up by Jules & Co. as they dive into 135 things you somehow missed in the 90s biggest movies.
The Usual Suspects. Number 20, the title's classic origins. Though the movie's title has existed as a general saying long before The Usual Suspects ever hit cinemas, its origins are not so coincidentally cinematic as well. The phrase was brought to the public attention and popularized by the 1942 classic Casablanca, where in the film's climax, the captain quips, "Round up the usual suspects." But writer Christopher McQuarrie only indirectly lifted it from Casablanca, as he settled on the title after reading an issue of satirical magazine Spy with a column bearing the very same name, itself inspired by the movie. Even so, if you're going to borrow, you might as well borrow from the best, whether intentionally or not, right? Number 19, Kint looks at Kuyan's coffee mug. Now there are many hints throughout the film to its big twist, that the identity of Kaiser Soze is in fact verbal Kint, and we get a subtle early nod towards Kint's ingenious deception when he's brought in for interrogation, and both himself and Agent Kuyan are served coffee. Once Kuyan asks Kint to tell him what happened after the lineup, Singer focuses on Kint as he stares at the base of Kuyan's coffee mug, foreshadowing that he will use elements from the interrogation room, including the Kobayashi branded mug, to spin his convoluted tale. Number 18. The cast literally couldn't understand Benicio del Toro. Now, Benicio del Toro is an easy show stealer as Fred Fenster, who is surely best remembered for his thick, scarcely understandable accent. And though this simply seems to be part of the character as written, it was actually something del Toro himself came up with during shooting, to the extent that the cast literally couldn't understand him. And so when the suspects are held in jail together and Hockney asked the group what Fenster just said, that was the actual actor expressing genuine befuddlement at del Toro's pronunciation. Number 17. Kaiser Soze's very thick urine. Though audiences likely wouldn't think anything of it upon first viewing, when Kaiser Soze urinates on the ship moments before it becomes a smouldering wreck, his urine is briefly focused upon, where it's decidedly less fluid than actual human pee should be. This ties in directly to a quote from Kint at the start of his interrogation, when he asks for a coffee and says, "I'm really thirsty. I used to dehydrate as a kid. One time I got so bad my piss came out like snot. I'm not kidding, it was all thick and gooey." And there you have it. Number 16, Bryan Singer's voice cameo. Director Bryan Singer has a sneaky off-camera voice cameo in the film during the iconic interrogation sequence, where Fenster reads the phrase, "Hand me the keys, you cocksucker." The voice of a cop can then be heard over the intercom requesting, "In English, please," which in addition to being the voice of Singer, was reportedly ad-libbed by the director while shooting the scene, per del Toro's incomprehensible performance as Fenster. It certainly added a welcome layer of humour to the scene, and no doubt contributed to it being one of the film's most memorable sequences. Number 15, Redfoot's accidental cigarette flick. Midway through the movie, the central characters get into a confrontation with Redfoot, the LA fence who sets up a meeting between them and Kobayashi. This culminates in Redfoot flicking his cigarette in the face of McManus, which viewers may have assumed was a feat of movie trickery, but alas, it was anything but. In reality, Peter Green was supposed to flick the cigarette at Stephen Baldwin's chest, but it landed in his face instead, resulting in a genuinely startled reaction from Baldwin. You'll notice that Singer cuts away from the cigarette flick extremely quickly, which is reportedly due to the cast and crew stopping to check on Baldwin before resuming shooting. Number 14, Kint quotes Baudelaire. Surely the movie's most memorable quote sees Kint tell Kuyan the greatest trick the devil ever pulled was convincing the world that he didn't exist. It's the sort of genius line that every screenwriter wishes that they could have come up with, but in fact, Christopher McQuarrie paraphrased the quote from legendary philosopher Charles Baudelaire. Baudelaire's 1864 short story, The Generous Gambler, included the delicious line, "The devil's deepest wile is to persuade us that he does not exist." McQuarrie, evidently a bit of a reader, repurposed the quote and in turn gave Kevin Spacey one of the most iconic lines of movie dialogue ever spoken. Number 13, the foreshadowed death order. After the team meets up with Kobayashi, they're given a briefcase full of envelopes detailing the upcoming ship mission that they're tasked with undertaking for Kaiser Soze. In an amusing detail, the envelopes are actually doled out by Keaton in the precise order that the doomed members of the team are killed: Fenster, Hockney, McManus, and then Keaton himself. That's quite the impressive troll on the part of Kint, and yet one which most viewers totally missed. Number 12, McManus's Bruce Lee homage. After Kobayashi's bodyguards are shot dead in an elevator, we briefly see McManus wearing a disguise whilst sat atop the elevator. And while it might seem like any regular maintenance-style disguise, it's actually a direct homage to the classic 1972 Bruce Lee movie Fist of Fury. In that film, protagonist Chen disguises himself as a nerdy telephone repairman, Coke bottle glasses and all, in order to gain access to the home of a man who facilitated the death of his teacher. Clearly, somebody involved with the production, most likely Singer or Macquarie, is quite the martial arts fan. Number 11. Kint literally confesses to killing Keaton. Though there are numerous subtle hints to Kint's crime lord alter ego, there is a moment in the movie's climax which sees Kint literally give the game away entirely. While being aggressively interrogated by Kuyan, he shouts at him, trying to tell me you saw someone kill Keaton, to which Kint replies, I did. However, if you listen very carefully, you can also hear Kint say, I did kill Keaton, but due to Kuyan shouting over the latter half of his sentence, neither Kuyan nor the audience actually notice it. Better still, the subtitles don't include Kint's confession either, so unless you're watching the movie with headphones or on a high-end sound system, you're certain to miss it. Number 10. Hockney's guilt. At the start of Kint's interrogation, Kuyan mentions to him the first thing that he learned on the job was how to spot a guilty man, that whoever actually manages to sleep after being put in jail committed the crime, because they've actually let their guard down and allowed themselves to rest. This actually turned out to be true about 10 minutes earlier when we saw Hockney as the only person laying down and having a rest after the men were arrested. Of course, we later learned that Hockney was in fact responsible for the gun truck hijacking which landed them in jail in the first place. So Kuyan wasn't wrong. Number 9. Soze means verbal. A major hint towards Kaiser Soze's true identity is hiding in plain sight throughout the movie, given that the word Soze is derived from the Turkish idiom Soze bogmak, which translates to talk unnecessarily too much and cause confusion. Verbal, basically. Given that the film itself mentions numerous times that Kaiser Soze is Turkish, any Turkish viewers may well have figured out the big twist long before anyone else. Number 8. Kint's possessions. Another hint lying in plain sight now. At the end of the movie, after Verbal is being released after posting bail, his possessions are then given back to him, including a gold watch, a gold cigarette lighter, and a pack of cigarettes. Well, for anyone paying close attention to the start of the movie, you'll notice that Kaiser Soze can be seen sporting all three of these items on his person. Even discounting the cigarette, there aren't too many people that would have both a gold watch and a gold lighter. Busted, right? Number 7. Christopher McQuarrie's cameo. While few viewers could be blamed for not recognising Christopher McQuarrie's cameo in the movie at the time of its release, in the 25 years since, McQuarrie has become a Hollywood household name, largely thanks to his recent involvement in the Mission Impossible franchise. And so, you might be startled on a rewatch to see McQuarrie hanging out in a number of scenes, most prominently appearing at the very end of the film where Kuyan frantically exits the police station in search of Kaiser Soze. McQuarrie plays the police officer who can be seen talking to two men, and he's practically looking right at the camera lens as if to address the viewer themselves. Number 6. Nobody behind the ropes. During one of the final flashbacks to the boat massacre, we see Verbal hiding from an assassin who shoots Keaton and sets fire to the dock, with Verbal apparently looking on through a pile of ropes. Except, Bryan Singer shot this sequence in a specific way to cast visual doubt on Kint's account, because as Verbal approaches the pile of ropes, we simply see him disappear behind a stack of tyres. Singer then pulls tight in on the ropes, and despite Kint apparently watching the massacre through the obvious holes in the pile, Kint's face cannot be seen at all. This was because Singer actually told Kevin Spacey to stop moving when he got to the tyres, ensuring that, quite literally, nobody was crouched behind the ropes, because of course, Kint's story was absolute bullshit. Number 5. Giancarlo Esposito is in it. Now, if you haven't revisited The Usual Suspects in the last decade or so, you'd be forgiven for forgetting that the fantastic Giancarlo Esposito appears in the film as a slick FBI agent known as Jack. Though Esposito certainly wasn't a no-name actor by 1995, he generally worked in a character actor capacity until 2009, where he played the career-defining role of Breaking Bad villain Gus Fring. And so, going back to this film today, seeing a decidedly younger Esposito in a role you'd never expect to see him in makes for quite the surprise indeed, and a pleasant one to be sure. Number 4. Kint's knowing smile. Midway through the film, Kuyan tells Kint that he thinks he's lying to cover for the real mastermind, Keaton, at which point Singer trains the camera on a close-up of Kint as he begins to smirk. Now, while on first viewing it simply seems like Kint is being amused by Kuyan's assessment, once we know who Kint really is, it's clear that he's smirking at something altogether more calculated. Given that Kint makes sure to stifle his smirk before Kuyan moves around to look him in the eye, there's no way this wasn't intentional on Singer's part. Number 3. The subliminal reveal. During the film's final montage of revelation, we're shown yet another perspective of Keaton being shot dead, except this time there's the faintest, most subliminal flash of the man known as Kaiser Soze himself. For just 2 frames, Kint is visible as Soze whilst shooting Keaton, seemingly confirming the twist that's about to be dropped in the stunned viewer's lap. It's so fleeting as to be easily missed by most, but those paying close attention have got a very small chance to learn the big reveal a few seconds ahead of everyone else. Number 2. The origin of Soze's hat and jacket. Now, Kaiser Soze is of course remembered for his distinctive attire, kitted out in a long black trench coat and hat, but this fitting ensemble is actually something that he picked up on the job. You see, earlier on, for a single shot, the clothes are visible hanging up in a room of a person that Soze murders before taking care of Keaton. Clearly, Soze appropriated the duds, given that he wouldn't be needing them anymore. Basically, if you thought that Kint just carried a trench coat with him wherever he went out on maneuvers, this was actually a feat of slick improvisation on his part. And number 1, Kint's smoking style. And finally, as Kint rides off into the unknown with Kobayashi at the end of the movie, you might notice that he holds his cigarette in a slightly peculiar way, grasping it between his index finger and his thumb. As you probably know, the overwhelming majority of smokers hold their cigarettes between the index and middle fingers. But Kint's peculiar approach is actually incredibly common in certain regions of Turkey. With Soze being Turkish and all, that's a pretty neat detail, albeit one that could definitely give him away if he forgets himself. The Truman Show. Number 17. Truman takes vitamin D supplements because he never sees true sunlight. The more you think about the particulars of how the Truman Show operates, the more questions that you'll have about the basics of keeping Truman alive. For one, with his whole life taking place inside a studio-controlled dome with no natural lighting, Truman would definitely suffer from massive vitamin D deficiency. In the long term, this would cause weak bones, depression, weight gain, cognitive issues, and significantly boost his susceptibility to cancer and high blood pressure. But the film actually has a sneaky answer for this, as during breakfast Truman has a bottle of vitamin D supplements next to his cup of morning coffee, confirming how the producers keep Truman in tip-top shape despite the obvious risks associated. Number 16. All the radio music is classical because it's royalty-free. You might have noticed that all of the music on Sea Haven's radio stations is classical, which, beyond helping keep Truman calm and pacified as he goes about his day, has an altogether more practical purpose for the show's producers. Almost all classical music is in the public domain, and therefore royalties don't need to be paid to the estates of the artist, nor do legal clearances have to be secured as there would be with pop music, and so the producers were free to have their pick of the tunes without getting into the muddy legal waters of paying up for contemporary songs, which, given the Truman Show's status as the world's most popular TV show, would surely cost a pretty penny. The depressing flip side of this, of course, is that Truman has never heard all of the wonderful non-classical music that the world has to offer. Number 15. The beer that Marlon drinks is being sold at the Truman Bar. Now, Marlon is frequently seen drinking a can, or 6 of them, of Penn Pavel's beer, as is of course one of the show's many hilarious in-universe product placements. But this actually goes one level deeper, as during the brief cutaway to the real-life Truman Bar, one of the beer pumps can briefly be seen serving none other than this beer. It confirms just how much of a cash cow the Truman Show really is, with each of its own disparate revenue streams connected into one massive monetary ocean for the producers. And fun fact, this beer has actually since been featured in a number of TV shows such as That 70s Show, Cougar Town, Chicago Fire, The Walking Dead, Parks and Rec, and many, many more. Number 14. Truman's childhood photo shows him as an imprisoned clown, which is basically what he is. When Truman and Meryl visit Truman's mother, Angela, they look through an old photo album containing pictures of Truman as a child. Angela eventually stops on a page with a picture of a young Truman wearing a clown costume while staring at the camera from behind a child-proof gate, with the handwritten caption, "My Little Clown." While on first glance this might seem like nothing more than an adorable picture taken by a loving parent, it actually symbolizes exactly what Truman is: a prisoner, albeit an unknowing one, and a clown whose entire life is a cruel, unwitting piece of performance to entertain the masses. Number 13. There are hidden cameras everywhere. Every aspect of Truman's waking life is monitored by hidden cameras, and the director ensured to have the film's set filled with small black cameras for audiences to seek out. Basically, every scene in the film contains hidden cameras, whether mounted on his neighbor's garbage can, to the struts of his office, or on monuments scattered throughout Sea Haven. Hell, even Truman's distinctive black diamond ring actually has a hidden camera in, as confirmed by a deleted scene, which was ingeniously given to him by his dead father before he drowned in ensuring that Truman would never take it off. And so, this also explains how the production struggled to track Truman during his final escape, because he gave the ring back to his father after being reunited with him earlier. Pretty genius. Number 12. The street cleaner only pretends to clean. Now keep an eye on the extras scattered throughout Sea Haven doing menial work, because you might just see them pretending to do their jobs in the most hilariously superficial fashion. For example, as Truman's suspicion ramps up at the end of the first act, and he begins testing out his theory, a street cleaner can be seen using a trash picker to, well, pick up nothing but thin air. His job is to simply hold a trash bag and make it look like he's filling it up, despite the Sea Haven set being pretty much pristine and trash-free. It's rather reminiscent of that extra in Quantum of Solace, who pretends to be sweeping the street behind Bond by sweeping a solid foot above the ground. Number 11. There's way more CGI than you think. Though it's no secret that CGI is used throughout the movie, such as with the iconic shot of the Sea Haven set as visible from space and creator Christoph observing the set from a digital hole in the wall, you'll probably be surprised to learn just how many subtle pieces of VFX there really are. For starters, the main Sea Haven town set was extended digitally in post-production, with the physical on-set shell buildings only being a single-story tall due to building regulations in the real town of Seaside, Florida, where the film was actually shot. The extra stories were added in post-production, and even more than 20 years later are impressively seamless additions to what was captured in camera. Number 10. The Sea Haven Island sign tries to convince Truman to stay. The film makes it abundantly clear that the producers have thrown up numerous hard roadblocks to prevent Truman from ever leaving Sea Haven, such as making flights to Fiji unavailable and instilling in him a pathological fear of water after his father's drowning. This is also hinted at in more subtle ways in the film, such as when Truman has a breakdown and takes Meryl on a frantic drive around Sea Haven, even driving onto the bridge out of the town. But keen-eyed viewers might have noticed the small sign at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, which reads, "You are now leaving Sea Haven Island." Are you sure that's a good idea? Though such a sign wouldn't stop a determined person from leaving, it is nevertheless an attempt to train Truman's subconsciousness to favour the familiarity of Sea Haven and fear the unknown outside. Number 9. Sea Haven is a few years behind real life. Though The Truman Show was released in 1998 and continued to feel pressingly modern in the years that followed, the film actually itself doesn't directly state the year in which it's set. However, those who keep their eyes peeled might notice that numerous dates are visible within the show, printed on newspapers and magazines, all pointing to the show's present year being late 1996, the same period that the film actually started shooting. Yet the real world away from the set is clearly a few years ahead of Truman, with a magazine cover about the show being dated for 1999, while a lunch menu is dated for early 1997. Given the enormous logistical challenge of a corporation not only adopting a child but building such a colossally expensive set, it's totally reasonable to assume that the movie was actually set a little in the future. As such, 1999 makes total sense. It's a few years ahead, but not far enough to create a clash between Truman's hermetically sealed existence and the real-world product placements that are shoehorned within it. Number 8. The travel agent is still wearing her makeup bib. Another incredible detail here. When Truman visits the Sea Haven travel agent and tries to book a flight to Fiji, he's told that there aren't any flights for at least a month. But because Truman's trip to the travel agent wasn't part of his typical routine and therefore totally unexpected by the production, the actress who plays the travel agent, Doris, first enters the room with her makeup bib still attached to her shirt. Evidently, she had to get a fast and loose makeup job once it was clear what Truman was up to, and once she sits down, she quickly remembers to take the bib off. Number 7. Sylvia has been trying to recruit cast members for years. Though Truman is married to Meryl, his true love is Sylvia, an extra who ultimately attempts to reveal to Truman the truth of his existence, and continues to campaign for him to be set free. A fleeting shot of Sylvia's apartment even reveals a bulletin board where it's clear that Sylvia has been in contact with various cast members, trying to convince them to help her free Truman. These cast members include such nondescript extras as a coffee vendor, a jogger, and a news vendor who is actually seen in the film, and who apparently considered becoming a whistleblower for Sylvia. Elsewhere, Truman's boss, Lawrence, was marked as no hope despite repeated attempts. The board also shows that Sylvia wasn't even able to get near Marlon. perhaps suggesting that the main cast members are tightly locked down during shooting to ensure they aren't harassed by those attempting to breach the show. Number 6. Truman and Marlon both own new Ford cars because of product placement. When Truman and Marlon are playing golf on an incomplete bridge, you might notice that they're both stood in front of their cars, both of which just happen to be not only Ford vehicles, but clearly new ones that look like they were just driven off the lot. Truman's Taurus sedan and Marlon's Ranger pickup were presumably given to the production by Ford as a means of product placement. Though we're left to assume how a free car would just end up in Truman's possession without him getting spooked, it's possible that he was simply offered an incredible bargain at the dealership, or maybe Merrill won it at a contest. Number 5. The Mount Rushmore magnifying glass is shaped like a TV. One of the movie's low-key funniest gags occurs when Truman's mother Angela is leafing through the family photo albums and happens upon a picture of the family at Mount Rushmore. Truman notes how small the monument looks in the picture, which is because it's very clearly a low-budget mock-up without the epic surrounding rock formations that you'd expect. But the detail you might have missed is that the magnifying glass that Angela is using to look at the picture is shaped like, you guessed it, a TV. While rectangular magnifying glasses do exist, circular ones are far more common, and given the ridiculous amount of detail that's gone into almost every aspect of the film, there's no way that this was a mere coincidence. Number 4. Truman's boat is named after Christopher Columbus. When Truman makes his daring escape by boat at the end of the movie, you might have casually noticed that the vessel is named the Santa Maria. Now, this might sound like a totally normal name for a boat, but it's one that retains a specific context in relation to Truman's journey. You see, the Santa Maria is also the name of the boat which Christopher Columbus used to sail to the New World. Of course, this isn't a million miles away from Truman literally breaking through the wall of the Truman Show and discovering his new reality behind it. Number 3. Paul Giamatti starts looking for work when Truman gets suspicious. Now, Paul Giamatti has a small but memorable role in the film as the control room director of The Truman Show, and one of the few behind-the-scenes crew members to show remorse for Truman, especially when Christoph nearly drowns him at the end of the movie. But there's one telling shot after Truman's suspicions begin to crystallize. We see him reading the classified section in the newspaper, suggesting that he thinks that Truman's not too far away from discovering the truth, and is already preparing to bail from a job which won't exist without its star. As much as he might be a small character, it's fantastic that the film lends so much blink and you'll miss it character development to even its peripheral players. Number 2. Psalm 139. Truman's boat contains another sneaky reference beyond the Christopher Columbus nod, with numerous shots showing the number 139 printed on the boat's sails. This could be any old designation which was already on the boat when the production acquired it, but in fact, that's not the case at all. 139 is actually reference to Psalm 139 from the Bible, which contains numerous lines speaking about an omnipotent figure and a regular human's inability to attain incredible knowledge held out of reach. Now, gee, doesn't that sound familiar? It's certainly more subtle than the Truman Show's creator being named Christoph, at least. And number 1, the forest Truman tries to escape through is entirely man-made. When Truman has his big mid-film freakout, he attempts to flee Sea Haven by running through the forest, which draws immediate attention to its own artifice for those paying attention. We only see a few clear shots of the forest layout, but the trees are planted in strictly defined rows, indicating that they are in fact entirely man-made rather than naturally occurring as they generally are in the US. The trees also appear to be rather young, relatively speaking that is, likely because they were only planted by the production around the time that Truman was born.
In The Matrix. Fair warning here, there is no spoon in this list, but there is a pen you're going to find particularly interesting. Number 20, The Matrix is green. Wanting to create a clear visual contrast between the real world and The Matrix itself, the Wachowskis used some clever cinematography to subtly create a distinction. Specifically, every scene that takes place within The Matrix was digitally given a subtle tint of green in order to transmit both its artificial nature and create a sense of unease. The colour was selected to give the feel of viewing the scenes through the screens of old PCs, which specifically rendered information in that kind of phosphorus green. You know, like in Fallout. The idea also being that as well as appearing artificial, being in this world should make you feel slightly queasy. Number 19, the real world is blue. That attention to detail didn't stop there though, as to better accentuate the putrid greens of The Matrix, director of photography Bill Pope gave the real world a contrasting blue hue all of its own. Speaking in an interview after the movie, he said, "From the Nebuchadnezzar and the pods, reality was given a cooler, bluer, more normal, less sickly look. The future in the film is cold, the sun is blotted out, there is no real warmth unless it is artificial heat, so that is why they went for the cool side. The Matrix should make you feel sick, and in reality, you should feel a little more at home, but never comfortable." Finally, the training program where Neo and Morpheus fight is tinted yellow to represent the fact that it's neither the Matrix nor the real world. Number 18. questions? Neo's character arc is easily broken into two halves. Eventually he becomes the One, and through fully utilizing his power to control the Matrix, rescues Morpheus, begins the human race's fight back against their maniacal overlords, and discovers Rage Against the Machine. But prior to this, Neo's role in the movie is to extract the exposition from the other principal characters, something done at the request of the studio, who were worried the audience wouldn't understand the plot otherwise. Thus, in the film's opening 45 minutes, Neo's 80 lines of dialogue contain an astonishing 44 questions. This is almost one every single minute and makes it one of the most subtext-heavy movies in modern cinema. Number 17, Bruce Lee. Despite being planned and storyboarded to within an inch of its life, The Matrix does include a number of unscripted or improvised moments. Ironically, they all tend to come during the most highly choreographed moments of the movie, despite the actors spending literally months in training to ensure they had the routines down. One of the most notable concerns a brief moment when Neo attempts to gather himself during the training fight with Morpheus. Setting himself up for the next bout, he quickly brushes his nose with his thumb in what Keanu Reeves would later reveal was an ad-lib tribute to Bruce Lee. Despite it not being the best take, he successfully lobbied to keep it in the film. Number 16, Walter Cronkite. One of the most striking elements of The Matrix was the performance of Hugo Weaving as Agent Smith. It's a performance that perfectly encapsulates the androgyny of a villain that is neither entirely man nor entirely machine, whilst retaining hallmarks of both. However, when researching the role and building the physical performance, Weaving began modelling parts of his delivery on the dry matter-of-factness associated with mid-20th century newsreaders, specifically Walter Cronkite, the legendary US journalist and host of CBS Evening News for almost 2 decades. After famously reporting both the moon landing and the Kennedy assassination, he was dubbed the most trusted man in America, giving Weaving's performance a sinister familiarity. Number 15, Drunken Boxing. One of the cleverest Easter eggs in the entire movie concerns the very brief shots of Neo's crash course in hand-to-hand combat. As he sat in the chair having the knowledge and muscle memory uploaded directly into his brain, several different styles briefly flash up on the screen, including the amusingly named Drunken Boxing. This is a nod to the movie's fight choreographer Wu Ping Yun, a man who partially made his name while working as the choreographer on Jackie Chan's Drunken Master, a movie where the titular character sets out to learn the martial arts style of Zhu Xuan, or as it translates back into English, Drunken Boxing. Number 14, The Glyphs. Now yes, the coded green rainfall became an iconic image of the movie and indeed everybody's screensaver in 1999, but the way it was created is actually a lot less clever than it looks on screen. While the effect needed to have them tumbling down the screen required some extensive work, sourcing the characters themselves was quite straightforward. Wanting to use both Western letters, numbers, and Japanese katakana symbols, the movie's production designer took one of his wife's sushi books and simply scanned in all the recipes. They then elected to reverse all of the characters to convey the idea that you're actually looking in from the wrong side. Number 13, Neo doesn't kick. Despite the rigorous months of training required to complete the film, Keanu Reeves entered pre-production while still recovering from severe neck surgery. This meant that while he was able to learn a lot of the choreography, he was without full use of his legs and thus sat out the bulk of the kicking training. This necessitated some alterations to the film, and as a result, Neo uses far fewer kicks than the other characters in the movie. In fact, his only real flurry of them comes in the Construct training fight with Morpheus, which was filmed near the end of production. Number 12, September the 11th, 2001. In the early scenes of the movie, Neo is taken in for questioning by a trio of agents who, in the hope of using him to apprehend Morpheus, begin to grill him on his criminal record. While being told that he is guilty of virtually every computer crime that we have a law for, there's also a very brief shot of his passport. As well as showing his place of birth as Capital City, it also shows that his passport expires on September the 11th, 2001, the same day as the horrific terror attacks on New York's World Trade Center. A harrowing coincidence that has caused all number of tin hat conspiracy theories online since. Number 11, Metacortex. As well as being just the perfect name for a middle-of-the-road respectable software company from the turn of the millennium, Metacortex is also a clever piece of foreshadowing for the rest of the movie. Breaking down the word gives us meta, which when used as a prefix means transcending, and cortex, which of course refers to the brain. Neo, a man literally about to transcend the limits of his own brain, works for a company whose name means that exact thing. His boss also tells them that you think you are special and that the rules do not apply to you, which of course is also true. Number 10, The Last Scene. Finally awoken from his sleep inside the Matrix, Neo is greeted by the horrifying reality of the world outside. Completely hairless, terrified, and covered in goo, he is confronted by a machine which unplugs him from his pod and flushes him out the system. In these scenes, Keanu Reeves looks much thinner, almost gaunt, as the reality of his confinement clashes harshly with the healthy the attractive man we'd seen prior. This scene was actually shot months after principal photography had wrapped to enable Keanu Reeves to lose the weight and the muscle definition he'd gained for the rest of the film. Number 9, Dark City. Given that they both deal with the premise that the world around you might not be real, The Matrix often gets compared to the movie Dark City. They bear a lot of similarities in terms of tone, atmosphere, and plot, but upon closer inspection, they've got a lot more in common. Wanting to keep a skyrocketing budget under control, Warner Brothers turned down the request to film the rooftop scenes on location and instead had the filmmakers use the existing sets from the Dark City instead. Some tweaks were made to disguise this, but by and large, they are nearly identical. Number 8, Simulacra and Simulation. Prior to the casting stage, the filmmakers were determined that every major member of the cast should fully understand the story that was being told. After years of having the idea rejected because it was too complex, having actors on board who grasped both the themes and the narrative was essential. The Wachowskis required that the actors read 3 books before even being allowed to open the script: Simulacra and Simulation, Out of Control, and Evolutionary Psychology. In a small tribute to this, Neo hides his product in a hollowed out copy of Simulacra and Simulation at the beginning of the movie. Number 7, Alice in Wonderland. As well as the required reading for this movie, there was also another heavy literary influence. Specifically, Lewis Carroll's Alice in Wonderland, which is referenced throughout the movie and informs a number of the main thematic points. Neo follows the white rabbit in the form of Dejua's tattoo, and Morpheus himself asks him if he's feeling like the book's titular character as he's tumbling down the rabbit hole. Even the choice between the red pill and the blue pill is evocative of the caterpillar's "one will make you bigger and one will make you small" choice from the book. Number 6, Chicago. While The Matrix takes place in an unnamed American city, some guesses can be made about its location. Now, residents of Sydney will undoubtedly recognize a few locations as, well, virtually the entire thing was filmed there, but there are a few hints that it was also set in Chicago, the Wachowskis' hometown. All of these street locations mentioned in the film are genuine intersections from Chicago, and during the underground fight scene between Neo and Agent Smith, several signs can be seen for the Loop, another hallmark of the city. Number 5, the cookie. When it comes to web browsing, everyone has heard of cookies. Chances are you've been asked to consent to them about 400 times today already, but not everybody fully understands what they actually are. In short, they are a small piece of important information sent by a website and retained by the browser to remember later. It's a tiny visual motif, but the Oracle handing Neo a single cookie after she's informed him about Morpheus's impending demise is an incredibly nuanced way of explaining the scene. She has given him a small piece of important information and quite literally given him a cookie. Number 4, I have no mouth and I must scream. Possibly the strangest tribute to the source material that influenced the film comes in the Neo-Smith interrogation scene early in the movie. As well as all the books previously mentioned, Lost City and Alice in Wonderland, the Wachowskis also drew inspiration from Harlan Ellison's science fiction short story, I Have No Mouth and I Must Scream. The book details how an artificial intelligence takes over the world and all but eradicates mankind, save for a few survivors that it keeps underground, and yep, stop me when you've heard this one before. As well as the obvious comparisons you can draw to the themes of The Matrix, the movie literally depicts Neo in this scene as having no mouth and trying to scream. Number 3, Neo as Jesus. Attracting numerous complaints from religious groups following its release, the comparisons between Neo and Jesus Christ are both profound and numerous. Neo is, of course, a messiah-like figure whose arrival has been foretold and is here to bring salvation to mankind. Early on in the film, Choi greets him with Hallelujah and refers to him as my savior, and towards the end he is declared dead, but through some sort of miracle, returns to life. Finally, even Neo's original name of Anderson has its own religious connotations, tracing its etymology to mean Son of Man, a common title given to Jesus in religious texts. Number 2, Copper Top. In another deft piece of foreshadowing, although admittedly not very subtle, Switch calls Neo a seemingly innocuous but actually very apt name during their first meeting. Listen to me, Copper Top, we don't have time for 20 questions. Copper Top might not jump out initially given that Neo has dark hair, but it's actually a common slang term for a Duracell branded battery. Given that at the time of this meeting, Neo is still plugged into the Matrix and is thus being used by the machines as a living battery, the name is absolutely bang on. Not that Neo would have had any idea why. Number 1, red and blue. The decision between red and blue is ultimately one that defines the entire story of The Matrix. By being offered the 2 different colored pills, Thomas Anderson is forced to make one of the most profound decisions in human history: keep dreaming or awaken to the horrors of the real world. However, it's actually a decision that's subtly telegraphed earlier in the movie. When receiving the mobile phone from Morpheus, Anderson is handed a form to sign and a pen with which to do so. Specifically, a pen that allows the holder to write in either red or blue blue ink. Clearly not ready to wake up yet, Neo chooses blue. So
Scream. 20. The outline of Casey's boyfriend is visible before his reveal. Who will ever forget Scream's iconic opening sequence in which poor Casey Becker, played brilliantly by Drew Barrymore, gets violently murdered, but not before witnessing her boyfriend Steve be gutted in the outside porch area. Yet, if you're paying close attention, you can actually see Steve's eerie, shadowy outline before Ghostface turns the porch lights on and reveals him to both Casey and the audience. It's definitely more easy to see in some TV display modes than others, but if you're struggling to make it out, just crank your TV's brightness up and you'll be able to see Steve ahead of the actual intended reveal. Number 19. A cover of Don't Fear the Reaper plays when Billy first shows up. After Casey's demise, we're introduced to series heroine Sydney Prescott and her horndog boyfriend Billy Loomis. As the two are fooling around after he sneaks into her bedroom, if you listen closely, you might notice that the light background music sounds a bit familiar. That's because it's actually a cover of Blue Oyster Cult's hit tune Don't Fear the Reaper by Gus Black, which if nothing else feels like a hint to the fact that Billy himself is the Reaper. Well, one of them anyway. The song's inclusion is likely to also be a reference to the original 1978 Halloween, as the original version of the song can be heard playing in the car while Laurie and Annie are on their way to babysit. Speaking of Halloween, number 18. The subtle Halloween references. There are actually 2 other references to Carpenter's original Halloween sneakily included in the film's opening sequence with Casey. When her parents show up, Casey's father tells her mother, "Get in the car and drive down to the Mackenzies," which is almost directly lifted from Halloween when Laurie tells the kids, "I want you to walk down the street to the Mackenzies and knock on their door." The other reference is more easily heard if you're watching with a decent set of headphones. When Ghostface quizzes Casey on horror movies and asks her who the main killer in Halloween is, an orchestral reworking of that movie's main musical theme can be faintly heard in the background. 17. There's a quiet creak in Sydney's closet hours before she's attacked. There's an easily missed hint that Sydney's about to be terrorised by Ghostface in the film's first act after she returns home from school. After trying to watch TV and being bombarded by news reports about her murdered mother, Sydney takes a walk through the house and stops briefly, at which point an extremely faint creak can be heard, which Sydney quickly shrugs off before taking a nap. Sydney wakes up a few hours later at night, and shortly after this she receives a taunting call from Ghostface, culminating in him attacking Sydney by bursting out of the very same closet she first paused by. It's a neat detail, and yet one so easily missed no matter how many times you might have seen the film. 16. Tatum's jersey is an homage to A Nightmare on Elm Street. One of Scream's more memorable supporting characters is Sydney's ill-fated best friend, Tatum Riley, played by Rose McGowan, who spends the mid-portion of the movie wearing a crop-top jersey with the number 10 on it. This might seem like it is the most basic, generic piece of wardrobe for a female high school student, yet it's in fact a nod to Wes Craven's own A Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. In the 1984 original, Johnny Depp's equally doomed character Glenn wears a distinctly similar jersey, also bearing the number 10 and being cropped at the midriff. A coincidence? Possibly, but knowing Craven's meticulous eye for detail throughout the film, especially where references to prior horror films including his own are concerned, I think not. 15. The two killers twist is foreshadowed. Beyond the identity of Ghostface being revealed, Scream's big twist is that there's not one but 2 culprits running around, Billy and Stu Matcher. This shock reveal is also slyly foreshadowed halfway through the movie, when Principal Himry chews out 2 students who played a prank dressed as Ghostface. It's obviously missed by just about everyone on their first viewing, but when watched within the context of the entire film itself on a repeat viewing, it's clearly a cheeky wink to in-the-know fans. 14. Skeet Ulrich has a goatee on the poster, but not in the movie. The business of Hollywood movie posters sure is a strange one, where nobody's name matches up with their actual picture, and sometimes their actual picture doesn't even match up with what they look like in the bloody movie. That's the case with one of the original posters for Scream, which includes a group shot of the entire cast, including a picture of Skeet Ulrich with a pronounced moustache and goatee. Obviously, his character Billy is clean-shaven for the entirety of the film, so we're left to assume this photo is a publicity still taken before or after principal photography took place. And yet, no matter how many times you've looked at the Scream poster, you've probably never even noticed the mistake. 13. Wes Craven plays Woodsboro High's janitor, Fred. It's a pretty popular and well-known little treat, this one, but it's so good we can't resist including it. Midway through the movie, we catch a brief glimpse of Woodsboro High School's janitor Fred, shortly before Principal Himbry is killed. Notably, he happens to be wearing a striped red-green jumper similar to that of Freddy Krueger in the Nightmare on Elm Street franchise. A cute gag, right? But it gets better, because Fred is in fact played by none other than Craven himself, wearing a hat, fake moustache, and long grey wig to disguise his appearance. Even if you know what Craven looked like, this one is easily missed given the mere seconds he spends on screen. Number 12. The cheerleader doesn't wash her hands in the bathroom. As horrifyingly bloody Scream so frequently is, one of the film's low-key grossest moments occurs without any of the red stuff at all, when two Woodsboro students bitch about Sydney in the bathroom, unaware that she's hiding in one of the stalls. One of the pair is a cheerleader played by Leonora Scelfo, who, upon exiting the bathroom stall, immediately starts applying lipstick without washing her hands. This wouldn't be so bad if not for the fact she also puts her finger in her mouth in order to ensure an even finish to the lipstick. Fun fact, Scelfo won the role due to being Skeet Ulrich's girlfriend at the time. Might want to reconsider your taste in women there, friend, given her interesting stance on hygiene. Number 11. The Fonz's jacket is hanging in Principal Himbry's closet. Moments before he's killed, we see Principal Himbry skulking around his office, at which point Craven ensures to include a few sly references to actor Henry Winkler's career-making role of the Fonz on the hit TV series Happy Days. For starters, after goofing around by wearing the Ghostface mask, he stops to fuss around with his hair in a distinctly similar fashion to the Fonz. And when he opens up his closet a minute later, eagle-eyed viewers might notice the character's distinctive black leather jacket hanging up on the left-hand side. Honestly, how could you cast Winkler in a meta-comedy and resist a gag like this? Number 10. The Ghostface costume is called Father Death. As much as the killer is universally referred to as Ghostface, the actual in-universe name for its creepy spectral outfit is Father Death. You'll need a good eye to notice this though, as it's only briefly visible when Dewey brings one of the unopened costumes to the police station. But what's more interesting is that this was allegedly intended to serve as a red herring, to further hint at the possibility of Ghostface being none other than Sydney's father, Neil Prescott, a theory which the movie lays out more overtly later on. Number 9. Linda Blair has a cameo as a news reporter. Roughly 40 minutes into the movie, there's a cameo that seems so obvious in retrospect and yet can be so easily missed by those not looking for it. The morning after Sydney's first encounter with Ghostface, an aggressive reporter asks Sydney, "So, how does it feel to be almost brutally butchered? People want to know. They have a right to know." The reporter is played by none other than Linda Blair, the Oscar-nominated star of the Exorcist franchise. Yet, given that Scream was released some 23 years after Regan McNeil made her six-spewing debut, there's no shame in missing it. This wasn't Blair's first collaboration with Craven though, having previously starred in his 1978 TV horror movie Stranger in Our House, known in Europe as Summer of Fear. Number 8. The meta, "Jamie, look behind you" gag. Most fans surely remember the terrific scene at the party where Randy Meeks is drunkenly watching Halloween, blissfully unaware that Ghostface is lurking behind him. At one point he even shouts, "Jamie, look behind you," referring of course to Jamie Lee Curtis and her protagonist Laurie Strode. It's a cute meta gag which also has another fourth wall breaking level to it that you might have missed. This is of course the fact that Randy is played by Jamie Kennedy, and so when Randy's telling Jamie to look behind her, he's inadvertently referring to himself, the actor also. This is a classic case of hiding the real punchline in plain sight, and many have surely missed it every time. Number 7. The creepy decorations in Stu's attic. Near the end of the movie, when Sydney is being chased through Billy's house by Ghostface, she runs into the attic where, for just a fleeting second, we can see some suitably disturbing decorations. This includes a clown doll strung upside down and another doll hung up by its neck in the background. They are only on screen in a clear, non-blurry view for a very short time, but nevertheless provide a telling hint that something is seriously wrong with Billy, and he's more than just a committed horror movie fan. Number 6. Wes Carpenter. It's bloody marvellous just how many minor movie details you can catch by watching films with the subtitles turned on. And that's certainly true in a movie as quip-happy and name-drop ready as Scream. When Sydney mentions to Tatum the possibility that her mother's killer is still out there, Tatum replies, "You're starting to sound like some Wes Carpenter flick or something." It obviously doesn't take a genre fiend to find out that this is a mix of both Wes Craven and fellow horror filmmaker John Carpenter, yet the line passes by so fast it's incredibly easily missed if you're not paying complete attention. And even then, subtitles are a wonderful thing. Number 5. There's a ridiculous dubbing mistake. No movie is perfect, though Scream features one especially egregious mistake where its automatic dialogue replacement, ADR, dubbing is concerned. Deep in the third act, when Sydney sees Dewey stumble out of the house with a knife in his back, she screams Dewey. Yet it's hilariously obvious that her mouth movements actually say no. Clearly, Wes Craven didn't like the way the take turned out and assumed nobody would actually notice that the spoken dialogue didn't match the mouth movements. But, this being the internet and all, someone always notices. This isn't the only time it happens in the film, but it's by far the sloppiest example. Number 4. The subtle Reservoir Dogs homage. At the end of the film, when Stu is stabbed a little too enthusiastically by Billy, he tells his murderous pal, "I think I'm dying here, man." The line of dialogue and intonation in which Matthew Lillard speaks it suggests this is a reference to Reservoir Dogs, where Mr. Orange says the very same thing in the very same tone after being shot. If you have any doubts, Quentin Tarantino himself mentioned a few years back that Craven attended an early festival screening of his directorial debut, but actually walked out during the infamous torture scene. Number 3. Actor Joseph Whipp also played a cop in Nightmare on Elm Street. Throughout the movie, Dewey works under Sheriff Burke, played by Joseph Whipp, who makes a small but memorable appearance and wears the same type of boots as Ghostface, as is ultimately proved to be a minor red herring. But Whipp's casting in the movie is another act of Craven getting cute with the audience, because Whipp had previously appeared in the director's A Nightmare on Elm Street, playing Sergeant Parker. Although Whipp doesn't act much these days, his filmography is littered with roles as cops and doctors, and Craven recasting him as a supporting police officer was clearly a nod to their work together more than a decade prior. Sadly though, Sheriff Burke never reappeared in any of the Scream sequels. Number 2. Matthew Lillard wasn't supposed to get hit with the phone. At the end of the film's climax, you probably remember the scene where an infuriated Billy is talking to Sydney on the phone and it ends up slipping out of his hands and hitting Stu around the head. As much as this might suggest Billy is losing his grip on the situation and his sanity, this was actually a complete accident, albeit one that Craven decided to keep in the movie because he loved Matthew Lillard's natural dazed reaction to the hit. It's a small moment at the end of the day, yet one elegant enough to seem like it was always part of the plan. Not quite. And number 1. Wes Craven throws some mid-credit shade. And finally, for those who bother to actually sit through the movie's end credits, will find a most bizarre comment hidden at the very end. Craven was on this idea far before Marvel Studios popularised it. No thanks whatsoever to the Santa Rosa City School District Governing Board. The story behind this is simple enough. The crew received verbal permission from Santa Rosa High School's principal to shoot Scream there. But shortly before production was scheduled to begin, the aforementioned governing board intervened and vetoed filming. Between this and the locals complaining about a grisly horror film being shot on their turf, Craven was forced to move filming to the Sonoma Community Center, situated to southeast of Santa Rosa. And so, a frustrated Craven got his own back by tarnishing the board's name in the annals of film history forevermore.
Jurassic Park. Number 20, Spielberg's cameo. Unlike some of his contemporaries who love to write themselves a prominent role in a movie, I'm looking at you, Quentin. Steven Spielberg is very rarely seen in front of the cameras. I mean, what did he do? Austin Powers? That's it. However, he does play a very small part in Jurassic Park, seen here supervising the unloading of the Velociraptor from early in the movie. He's the one with the beard, in just there in front of the gate with the white shirt. You have got to squint a bit. Number 19, Mr. DNA. While receiving a tour of the facility, Dr. Grant, Dr. Sattler, and Ian Malcolm are given a video presentation about how the park was conceived by a very friendly animated strain of acid called Mr. DNA. While it's a bit of a hokey scene and incredibly heavy on the exposition, it was a request made by the filmmakers to try and control the budget. By having one cheesy scene that explains the entire premise of the film, how they discovered the dinosaurs, and how they subsequently built the park, it saved millions of dollars on the writing and filming required to transmit that information to the audience otherwise. Not to mention, keeping the runtime down. Number 18, Must Go Faster. Around halfway through the movie, Dr. Sattler and Muldoon head out into the park to try and find what happened to the two explorers. Dr. Grant and the children are missing, Gennaro is found in multiple pieces, but Ian Malcolm is just about still alive and in need of help. After getting him onto the Jeep, they are found by the Rex. A chase scene ensues, and with the Rex quickly gaining ground on the group, Malcolm utters the line, "Must go faster." Now, director Ronald Emmerich liked it so much that when he found himself working with Jeff Goldblum the following year, he had it written into the script of Independence Day. Goldblum saying it to Will Smith's Captain Hiller as they attempt to escape the alien mothership. Number 17, 15 Minutes of Fame. As well as being the entire premise of the movie, it's hard to argue that dinosaurs aren't also the stars of Jurassic Park. Virtually all of the film's most memorable or iconic moments involve them, and it's hard to recall any major scenes where they don't feature in some capacity. However, However, when totted up across the 2-hour 7-minute runtime, dinosaurs are actually only on screen for a grand total of 15 minutes. Even more extraordinary is that for all of the praise of the film's digital effects work, CG dinosaurs only make up 6 of those 15 minutes. Number 16, Laura Dern. Laura Dern's performance is often picked out as one of the highlights of the entire movie, but her experience of Jurassic Park was a lot more real than it might have looked. Firstly, in the scene where Ellie is attacked by the raptor in the maintenance corridor, the tears streaming down her face were not originally part of the script. She was in fact crying for real, as the way the shot had been constructed genuinely terrified her. Slightly more subtly though, her character flirting with Ian Malcolm also had its roots planted in reality, as she began a relationship with Jeff Goldblum after the film as a result of their time together on set. Cute. Number 15, Nedry's desk. While we are reintroduced to Dennis Nedry in the Jurassic Park control room, his computer is home to a veritable treasure trove of movie Easter eggs. One subtle inclusion is a small picture of Robert Oppenheimer, the so-called father of the atomic bomb, who is arguably the poster boy for man's fear of its own creation. On a lighter note, a small window on the screen of his computer can clearly be seen playing the movie Jaws. Not only a nod to Steven Spielberg's previous work, but also the first time in his career he'd worked with animatronic animals. Number 14, The Storm. Jurassic Park's production was plagued by the arrival of Hurricane Iniki onto the movie sets. This forced a number of changes to the schedule, as well as elements of the operation to be moved back to Los Angeles for the remainder of the shoot. Ironic, really, as the arrival of a major storm is also a plotline of the movie. However, what often passes viewers by is that the storm in this film is not merely there to fill in the narrative hole of the story, but to dramatically illustrate man's inability to effectively control nature. As well as the creatures in the park running amok, InGen's state-of-the-art facility is entirely undone by, of all things, some weather. Number 13, the Dilophosaurus doesn't move. To get the exact look he was after, Steven Spielberg had to effectively invent new forms of creature design and new ways in which to film them. The advances this movie made in digital effects are still being felt today, as too are the elaborate animatronics that comprise the bulk of the dinosaurs seen on screen. However, one thing the production crew wasn't satisfied with was the Dilophosaurus. Specifically, that they couldn't find a convincing way to make it move on screen. Every attempt either seemed too light or too heavy for its body, so in the end they compromised and had it stand still in every single shot. Number 12, Exit Through the Gift Shop. As well as being an enormous success at the box office, Jurassic Park was one of the biggest commercial successes in cinema history. The marketing and merchandise budgets dwarfed the $60 million cost of production, but also recouped considerably more than the $83 million the film made at the box office in its opening week. Part of this was down to the 100 separate licensing agreements Universal had reached prior to production, and the genius decision to include only official merchandise in the movie's own gift shop. Everything seen on screen, from toys, figures, clothes, lunchboxes, even a book titled The Making of Jurassic Park, could be purchased in real life. Number 11, attention to detail. During the terrifying game of cat and mouse between Tim, Lex, and the two velociraptors, there's a moment in the kitchen that's usually considered a bit of a plot hole. Tim runs into the freezer room where somehow the floor just happens to be covered in ice. Despite this being very convenient for a small child with rubber-soled sneakers, it's actually a testament to the detail that went into the writing. Prior to this scene, John Hammond is eating the ice cream that would otherwise have defrosted due to the power being out. This would no doubt have caused water to leak from the freezers and onto the floor as everything inside them began to thaw. However, after this, Dr. Sattler is able to restore power to the park. This would reactivate the freezers and, as a result, cause the water on the floor to freeze back over. So you see, it's actually really clever. Number 10, ACGT. One of the movie's most iconic visuals sees the velociraptors stalking Dr. Grant, Dr. Sattler, Tim, and Lex as they attempt to escape through the ceiling crawl space. One of the raptors rears up on its legs, stretches its neck out and attempts to sniff them out, while the phosphorus green glow of a computer monitor patterns its skin. This is often incorrectly attributed to light being reflected through the bars of the ceiling grate, but it's actually the letters ACGT, specifically an abbreviation of adenine, cytosine, guanine, and thymine, the 4 key components of DNA. Number 9, Triceratops colors. Another iconic moment in the film sees Dr. Grant, Dr. Sattler, Ian Malcolm, and assorted park employees attempting to treat a Triceratops with a bad stomach. They check it over, inspect its eyes, and Sam Neill even takes a moment to appreciate the miraculous beauty of the creature. Not in a weird way, but in a decision that probably went down incredibly badly with the people who designed the creatures. The Triceratops was originally bright and colourful. Purples, greens, yellows, its hide was one of the most visually stunning things in the entire film, until effects coordinator Stan Winston took one look at it, decided it didn't match its surroundings well enough, and just covered it in mud. You can still sort of faintly see it though. Number 8, Picasso. In 1937, Pablo Picasso created Guernica, an oil painting that's still to this day considered to be one one of the most moving and powerful anti-war paintings in history. Depicting the horrendous aerial bombing of the Spanish town of the same name, its ability to invoke horror and anxiety is undisputed in the art world. Wanting to recreate a slice of said horror and anxiety, Spielberg commissioned a special dinosaur-themed reworking of the painting to be displayed in the Visitors Center. It can briefly be seen behind John Hammond later in the film and, well, very weird flex, but okay. Number 7, The Godfather. Despite surviving and being a far nicer character in Michael Crichton's novel, Donald Gennaro meets Jurassic Park's grisliest fate at the hands and teeth of the T-Rex. It's not immediately obvious, but when he initially makes it into the toilet stall, he begins to mutter a Hail Mary. This was, according to actor Martin Ferrero, an idea he took from one of the final scenes of The Godfather Part 2, where Fredo mutters his own Hail Mary prior to Neri killing him on Lake Tahoe. Quite what he saw as the similarities between these two characters, I'm not totally sure, but there you are. Number 6, Killing for Sport. There's an interesting line in the Lost World Jurassic Park where the expedition's leader reassures the terrified group that the Rex just fed, so he won't be hunting for a while. While that's an incredibly callous way to refer to the man who's just been eaten alive, it's also entirely correct, which makes the behaviour of the velociraptors in this movie quite curious. In the final act of the film, they kill Robert Muldoon and Ray Arnold, two fully grown adults who would likely feed a pack of raptors for a number of days. Yet, they continue to hunt Tim and Lex and Dr. Grant and Dr. Sattler. While it's never explicitly stated on screen, this is because they're not hunting to eat, they're hunting for sport. Or possibly even in the case of Muldoon, hunting for revenge. One of the franchise's many clues at their overall intelligence. Number 5, Why Didn't I Build in Orlando? Faced with the impending problems created by the incoming storm, John Hammond reflects on the park's tropical location with the line, "Why didn't I build in Orlando?" It's an amusing throwaway line, but it's also a little joke being had at the expense of Universal Studios, the movie's distributors. Universal, you see, had two theme parks all of their own at the time, and both were situated in Orlando. One of them, Universal Orlando Resort, is now currently home to the Jurassic Park River Adventure, which incorporates elements of the movie into a log flume ride, and apparently they've spared no expense. Number 4, Fish Out of Water. Early in the movie, Dr. Sattler comments that these are aggressive living things that have no idea what century they're in, and they'll defend themselves violently if necessary. It's a neat line of foreshadowing, but it also gives away how they can be defeated. In Jurassic Park, whenever a character is caught by one of the dinosaurs in the wild, that is the end of them. Gennaro on the toilet, Muldoon in the jungle, even Nedry on the waterfall, all of them are made short work of. However, when they're able to take the creatures into a more man-made setting, like Tim and Lex in the kitchen or the final scene of the film, the humans are able to use their environment to survive. Number 3, eye level. The movie's smartest visual motif is one you're almost certain to have been oblivious to. In the first half of the movie, whenever a character is looking at a dinosaur on screen, they are doing so below eye level. The birth of the raptor eggs, the sick triceratops, they do move in herds. All of this is from a high to low perspective. However, the second half of the film flips this entirely, where all shots are now of the characters looking up at the dinosaurs. Everything with the T-Rex goes without saying, but Tim and Lex crawl along the floor in the kitchen, the Brachiosaurus looms over Dr. Grant, and even Muldoon crouches down to hunt the raptor. Very simply, this is to represent the changing levels of control in the park. The big exception to this is of course the initial scene where Grant and Sattler first encounter the Brachiosaurus, but this is used to represent the marvel and wonder of the park's premise. Number 2, the seatbelt foreshadowing. Life finds a way is arguably Jurassic Park's most enduring quote, but it's only used by Ian Malcolm as a retort when Dr. Wu asks, "You're implying that a group composed entirely of female animals will breed?" It's a fair question, but one that's smartly foreshadowed slightly earlier in the movie. When making the bumpy descent in the park's helicopter, Dr. Grant frantically fumbles around with his seatbelt, only to be left holding the two female ends of the buckle. Thinking on his feet, he simply ties them together, forming a makeshift belt. It wasn't life itself on display here, but nonetheless, he found a way. Number 1, we spared no expense. Another profound quote from the movie sees John Hammond say, "We spared no expense no less than 5 times. First when he's asking Grant and Sattler to visit, then later when they arrive at the park, again when introducing the presentation, later on the electric cars, and finally as a bit of hubris while eating the defrosting ice cream." The irony in this, of course, is that the power outages and the ultimate collapse of the park is down to the actions of Dennis Nedry, a man we discover is only working there because of how low his bid was to run the park systems. If Hammond had spared no expense there, none of this would have happened. In Independence Day. Number 20, Morse code. The story behind the movie's score could easily be an article of its own. Composer David Arnold retreated into seclusion to escape the runaway marketing, only to be awoken by helicopters flying banners for the movie. However, one secret hidden within the movie itself is that the drum sounds he composed for the opening scenes are in fact Morse code. The dash ... rhythm they beat spells out D-I-E, the same message provided by the captured alien when asked by the president what it is they want the human race to do. Number 19, the Death Star. In a small nod to one of Hollywood's other major sci-fi adventures, one of the satellites included in the movie's opening scenes is actually a toy Death Star strapped to a number of solar panels and tubes. Perhaps to hint at the upcoming planetary destruction, perhaps to show the awe-inspiring size of the alien mothership, or just perhaps a small joke given it directly follows a line comparing it to a moon. Either way, a clever inclusion. Number 18, improv. After casting Jeff Goldblum in the role of David, Ronald Emmerich was blown away by the chemistry he had with both Judd Hirsch, who plays his father, and Will Smith, who is Will Smith. As a result, he began amending the script in a way that would best utilise this natural camaraderie. It's something that's only really noticeable on a rewatch, but the bulk of dialogue between Goldblum and either Hirsch or Smith is largely improvised. In particular, the drive into Washington and all the shots inside the alien fighter. Number 17, the newscasters. Actors, by and large, tend to be quite good at acting. However, acting as a TV newscaster is a form of acting that most actors tend to be unable to act convincingly. An anomalous Achilles heel that's rampant in the industry and sadly ruined numerous scenes in famous movies. Now, knowing that a film about a global alien invasion would require heavy integration of news coverage, but still wishing to avoid this immersion-breaking trope, Roland Emmerich made the decision to exclusively cast genuine newsreaders in the roles. Over 70 are included in the film, with each of them played by some of that nation's actual journalists. Number 16, Forget My Lawyer. Despite including global destruction on a never-before-seen scale, Independence Day was billed as fun for the whole family by Fox, hoping as they were to cash in on that universal demographic so expertly drawn in by Jurassic Park. Job 1 was keeping the rating at or below PG. The Motion Picture Association of America was happy to oblige, provided a line was removed from the movie. When Harvey Fierstein's character is told by Jeff Goldblum what's going on, he originally says, "I gotta call my brother, I gotta call my housekeeper, I gotta call my lawyer. Nah, f*** my lawyer." Unable to cleverly edit around this, Emmerich simply had it redubbed to "Forget My Lawyer," but if you look close, you can see his mouth doesn't match up with the audio. Number 15, Nice Working For You, Mario. Without wishing to accuse two of Hollywood's most esteemed creators of indulging in some pettiness, Independence Day does include a slightly barbed line directed at a former collaborator. When Jasmine quits her job at the strip club, she storms out and shouts, "Nice working for you, Mario," at her former boss. This is, allegedly, a joke at the expense of Mario Casar, the producer who forced both Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin to make several contentious last-minute changes to their previous project Stargate. Because when you can't say it yourself, say it with a fictional stripper. Number 14, Here She Is Avenue. Left out of the theatrical cut but included in the special edition, a number of funny names were included in the movie's telephone directory. David, attempting to find Patricia's phone number while he sat outside the White House, stumbles across a bunch of them. As well as living on Here She Is Avenue, there's also Guess Who Boulevard, Yum Yum Road, On the Road, Theme Park, Skywalk, Hard Drive, and Chuck Jones Drive. The last one, a dedication to famous cartoonist Chuck Jones, the man behind the majority of the classic Warner Brothers cartoons. Number 13, Pyrotechnics. In a clever example of filmmakers thinking on their feet, a small pyrotechnics accident on set was captured on camera in the hope they'd be able to use it in the film somewhere. After all, a film with this much destruction can never be short of some burning wreckage. In the end, they managed to find a place for it as the falling, flaming debris of the welcome wagon helicopters. The shot immediately after the convoy is destroyed is simply that on-set accident recycled. Number 12, Toy Story. Despite setting the record for the number of scale models used in the making of a movie, Independence Day did hilariously cut one corner when it came to the destructive effects work. While all the cars destroyed during the initial alien attack are either real vehicles hollowed out for stunt work or smaller models made especially for the scene, the fire engine that can be seen flying through the air is in fact a toy truck bought for a few dollars from a nearby store. Number 11, Dr. Oaken. While Brent Spiner's character of Dr. Oaken might seem too bizarre to be a real person, the inspiration for him is actually drawn from one of Roland Emmerich's Hollywood collaborators. Not even subtly either. Jeffrey A. Oaken, who worked with the director on 1994's Stargate, strongly influenced both the look and the mannerisms of his Independence Day namesake, with Spiner studying the effects supervisor for a number of weeks while trying to perfect the part. Number 10, and what the hell is that smell? Despite being one of the movie's most famous lines, and what the hell is that smell, is largely misinterpreted by the audience. Understandably so, as at the time, Will Smith's Captain Hiller is dragging an unconscious alien across a desert, but the smell in question is not referring to the extraterrestrial wrapped in his parachute. Instead, it's an improvised line that made it into the final cut. The filming location, Great Salt Lake, is home to schools of brine shrimp which, after they die, decompose in the area. Nobody warned Smith about this, but on a hot enough day, with a strong enough wind, the smell of those rotting carcasses washes over the entire area. Number 9, Freedom Ridge. Wanting the movie to be a real celebration of alien hunting and conspiracy culture, hence why Area 51 features so prominently, Roland Emmerich filled the movie with odes to America's legion of UFO nuts. One understated moment occurs in the base's briefing room when a night vision shot of the facility pans across the screen. This was actual footage filmed from the so-called Freedom Ridge, an elevated spot of the Nevada desert where truth-seeking individuals would set up camp to search for flying objects and observe the shadowy US facility. The area has since been closed to the public. Number 8, Wordsworth. As well as the shots of Freedom Ridge visible in the scene, there's a seemingly indecipherable stream of numbers and words scrolling across the bottom of the display. However, in the midst of all this, and now I see with eye serene the very pulse of the machine also crops up. While the reasons for including this, beyond the obvious visual metaphor, are unclear, this is an excerpt from William Wordsworth's poem, She Was a Phantom of Delight. Number 7, the blue panels. While designing the movie's sets in pre-production, Area 51 was envisaged to be a bustling hub of activity. The filmmakers planned to have small sets for the main cast with numerous windows showing other people busying themselves outside. To achieve this, blue material was draped behind said windows so that the other rooms could be digitally inserted later. However, Roland Emmerich decided that, in fact, the look of the blue fabric on the windows gave the facility a more clinical appearance and just had them left in. Number 6, Houston graffiti. As mentioned, Independence Day still holds a record for the number of models used in a movie, which, thanks to the development of modern visual effects, will likely never ever be broken. Virtually every car, plane, building, or spaceship is an actual scale replica. This meant that the model crew were an essential part of the staff and thus free to have a bit of fun with their work. While constructing the set for downtown Houston during the nuclear attack scene, they filled the background wall with their own initials. Number 5, War of the Worlds. Now, as you might expect from a movie based on the cataclysmic alien invasion of Earth, Independence Day contains a number of nods to H.G. Wells' eponymous War of the Worlds. Many of them are very obvious, but one of the most subtle concerns the Houston scene. Specifically, the streetlights visible in the aftermath of the nuclear attack were designed to resemble the alien craft seen in the 1953 movie. On top of this, the Air Force Base MCAS El Toro, where Captain Hiller is based, is the same Air Force base used in Wells' story. Number 4, the Thinking Cap. Towards the movie's climax, with all hope looking lost, David stumbles upon an ingenious idea to take out all the alien ships in one fell swoop. After his father tells him to get up off the floor before he catches a cold, inspiration strikes him like a bolt of lightning, and for some reason, he weirdly positions his hand across his head. According to Jeff Goldblum, this was an improvised decision designed to symbolize David putting his thinking cap back on. Quite how that's represented with a flat hand across his forehead and not a jaunty little milady gesture in reverse, only he knows. Number 3, the virus. Easily the biggest tribute to War of the Worlds is also the easiest one to miss. The entire plan to destroy the alien invaders devised by David is exactly the same as that from the famous H.G. Wells story, albeit with a modern twist. There, humanity is unable to overcome the technology of their galactic attackers and instead is saved when the planet's various microbes and bacteria begin to destroy the creatures on a biological level. In Independence Day, with humanity also unable to overcome the technology of their galactic attackers, they devise a way to infect their computers instead. Both stories see the human race saved by a virus. Number 2, 2001. Easily the best Easter egg in the entire movie flashes up on David's laptop towards the final scenes. While booting up his computer ahead of their trip to the mothership, his loading screen shows a red lens and the words, "Good morning, Dave." Now, if you're not there already, this is a direct ode to Stanley Kubrick's 2001 A Space Odyssey. In particular, the famous line uttered by the homicidal computer program HAL right before he begins to dispense with his own crew. Number 1, must go faster. A neat little Easter egg, this borrowed from a previous summer blockbuster. Director Roland Emmerich liked a line in Jurassic Park so much that when he found himself working with Jeff Goldblum the following year, he had it written into the script of Independence Day. After getting Dr. Ian Malcolm onto the Jeep, Dr. Sattler and Muldoon are found by the Rex. A chase scene, one of the film's best, ensues, and with the Rex quickly gaining ground on the group, Malcolm utters the line, "Must go faster." Goldblum would then, of course, say the exact same line to Will Smith's Captain Hiller as they attempt to escape the alien mothership. The Shawshank Redemption. Number 18, the movie feels kind of familiar. Yeah, you see, if you've watched both Goodfellas and The Shawshank Redemption, you won't be able to unsee the structural similarities between the two. The narration, the editing techniques, the passage of time, it's all taken straight from Scorsese and given to Shawshank. It's even been said that Darabont, worried that his own inexperience would derail what could be a great film, would watch Goodfellas every Sunday during the shoot to make sure he was staying on course. Number 17, the maggot mandate. Look, right, if life has taught me one lesson repeatedly, it's that a crow's gotta eat if it wants to keep on living. I mean, don't ask, but it's just a simple fact. However, if you try to feed one a live maggot on the set of your film, the American Humane Society will quickly pipe up and point out that this is going to absolutely suck for the maggot. Thus, the shoot of The Shawshank Redemption screeched to a halt as the crew scoured the ground for a dead maggot so that they could get back on schedule. They eventually found one and the crow feeding scene was finally shot, but if you watch it back, you'll notice that the maggot in question is no longer wriggling. Number 16, Red's smoking stipulation. One of Red's claims to fame within the Shawshank prison is his ability to secure the goods and discreetly distribute them amongst the inmates, and goddamn does this movie make me miss smoking. But even though he's seen trafficking, holding and pocketing cigarettes throughout the film, careful viewers will notice that Red never actually smokes a single one. This is some very subtle symbolism over the purity of Red's character. Yeah, he might live amongst all these filthy crooks, but he ain't one of them. Number 15, how many people are in this prison? Understandably, locals in the town of Mansfield were clamouring to be a part of the Shawshank Redemption when shooting was taking place. Hopeful extras and actual ex-cons turned up every single day, hoping to secure a part. But the problem was that they either all worked day jobs or could only do one day of filming. This meant that the movie had a revolving door of background characters, and as a result, virtually every scene has a different cast of extras. There are about 3 or 4 times as many people in this prison as would actually be in this prison. Number 14, the Royal River. Throughout Stephen King's novels, locations and characters will recur to give the impression that they all take place in the same universe. Darabont thankfully got this, which is why he made sure to include a reference to the Royal River. While it understandably passed over most viewers' heads, it's revealed that it's the Royal River that Andy throws his revolver into. The keen-eyed or eared or whatever among you will remember that this is the same river where the characters in 1986's Stand By Me were attacked by leeches, which is gross. Number 13, prisons are like hotels these days. Similar to the Royal River name drop, The Shawshank Redemption also made sure to pay tribute to another hugely popular Stephen King book and subsequent feature film, The Shining. Throughout the infamous story of the Overlook Hotel's latest, let's call them residents, is the menacing room 237. Look closely and you'll see that this number also appears in The Shawshank Redemption just outside of Red's prison cell. Number 12, Tim Robbins' camera tricks. Look, right, Tim Robbins is abnormally tall. 6'5" in real life, which made playing Andy here quite tricky as none of the other actors were anywhere near that. Standing him in crowds of prisoners looked, well, ridiculous. So next time you're watching the movie, try and count how many times Andy is not standing up straight or standing right next to his fellow actors. Most of the time he is framed or positioned in such a way that he seems almost a good foot shorter than he actually is. Number 11, where are the accents? No matter how hard a director tries, there's always going to be one major flaw that slips through the cracks. For all its accolades, even The Shawshank Redemption is guilty of a glaring mistake or two in the very framework of the film. The fiction fictional Shawshank Prison is located in Maine, but the movie was not shot in the state. This means that most of the actors and extras are not from Maine either. As such, the very heavy and distinct New England accent is nowhere to be found in the film. Now, Castle Rock, the TV show set in the same town and even featuring Shawshank itself, is full of these accents, so it's weird that the film has none. Number 10, the grass is always greener. Like any movie worth analysing in depth, and my god do I analyse a lot of movies in depth, The Shawshank Redemption is overflowing with covert symbolism and subtle subtext. One of the most symbolic shots in the entire film is also one that plays out incredibly deftly. When Andy and the other prisoners are working on the roof, take a look at what the world looks like just beyond the bleak exterior of the prison walls. It is always green grass. Darabont relies on the age-old saying of the grass always being greener on the other side to foreshadow Andy's own Shawshank Redemption. I said the thing. Number 9, Morgan Freeman's mugshot. When the audience sees young Red's mugshot attached to his parole papers, they're not looking at digitally doctored images or even just old pictures of Freeman himself. This is actually 35-year-old Alfonso Freeman, his son. Yep, and he appears further on in the movie as well as one of the cons berating the fresh fish on Andy's first night in prison. That means that his first acting credit actually includes 2 separate roles of both young Red and this unnamed criminal. Impressive. Number 8, making an exit thanks to an exodus. Knowing that Andy's hiding his rock hammer in his Bible makes the cell-searching scene particularly nerve-wracking. Still, despite the risk, Andy still has time to be ironic. Once his hammer is discovered, look where he decided to start cutting out space for it. The book of Exodus. Now, if you're not up on either your Latin or your irony, that is a word taken from the ancient Greek word for departure, as in to leave, as in to go away, as in I am going to bust out of this prison cell and there's nothing you can do to stop me. Number 7, the callback to the creek. On Andy's first night at Shawshank, a keen eye will notice that an exterior shot of the prison is angled from right near the creek that Andy will eventually be running through nearly 20 years after this first sight. Now, this shot means nothing to someone seeing the film for the very first time, but it'll be incredibly meaningful on any repeated viewings. It's a very subtle setup for a huge emotional payoff. Number 6, those are Frank Darabont's hands. Yes, our director, like fellow King adapter Stanley Kubrick before him, is a perfectionist on the sets of his films. When Andy's seen loading a revolver in the early moments of The Shawshank Redemption, the camera shows a close-up shot of his hands. Darabont was so convinced that Tim Robbins wouldn't be able to do exactly what he wanted that he just did it himself. And the same thing happens later when we get a close-up of Tim Robbins carving Andy's name into the wall. If you compare the hands here to the rest of the movie, they are clearly someone else's. Number 5, Andy's strange sewer. Alright, hands up, so the next few are definitely splitting hairs a bit, but when examined as part of a rewatch, you cannot unsee them. Take Andy's experience with the sewer pipe. When he first breaks through it, let's call it water, gushes out like a fountain. Eventually, he's able to climb inside a completely drained pipe. Thing is, that isn't how the laws of physics work though, and the pipe should only have drained down to where he broke it open, meaning he should be swimming through that thing, not crawling. Number 4, Andy's anti-aging problem. By the time the film has reached its final reel, Andy has been imprisoned at Shawshank Prison for just 1 year shy of 2 whole decades. 19 years spent behind bars, and let me tell you, the stress of that film took a toll on me, so you can only imagine what it did to him. But for some reason, there's never any effort made in this film to present either Andy or Red as having aged at all. This is them at the start of the movie, and this is them 19 years later. For comparison, this is Tim Robbins when the movie came out in 1995, and this is him in 2014. You see what I mean here? Number 3, Andy's yards in a mile problem. Andy's eventual escape from Shawshank Prison is one of the biggest emotional payoffs in the entire film and indeed of movie history, yada yada, etc, etc. His endless hours spent hammering away at the wall, the difficulty smashing through the sewer pipe, and his arduous crawl through the disgusting sewage is enough to crack even the toughest heart, including mine, but sorry, there is a huge goof in this plan. 500 yards. Just shy of half a mile, says Red. 1 mile is 1,760 yards. Half a mile is 880. 500 yards isn't even a third of a mile. I get it, yes, he loves Andy, and if that was one of my friends, I would have said that he crawled for 5 miles through solid molten shit but still there's no need to gas him up inaccurately like that. Number 2, you've definitely seen these guys before. Frank Darabont's Stephen King adaptations always seem to use and then reuse the same group of character actors. If you've seen his follow-up to The Shawshank Redemption, 1999's The Green Mile, or his third King outing, 2007's The Mist, you might recognise a few familiar faces without knowing exactly where you've seen them before. Jeffrey DeMunn, who plays the DA in 1946, can also be seen in both The Green Mile and The Mist. The same goes for William Sadler, who plays Haywood, and Brian Libby, who plays Floyd. Then there's Mac Miles, who plays Tyrell in Shawshank and appears in The Green Mile as an orderly named Hector. Number 1, that is not tax day. Here it is, number 1, the most nitpicky entry I have ever done in this particular series of critically acclaimed movie lists, the dreaded tax day in The Shawshank Redemption, which is frequently referenced and everybody seems to be scared of, is April 15th. But this is all wrong because back in the 1940s, federal income taxes were due on the 15th of March, and even if they weren't, it's the Bureau of Internal Revenue they need to fear because the IRS didn't exist until the 50s. I'm really sorry, okay? This is just how I am.